So we're having a conversation with Dustin from Phoenix Revival. Oh, hi, Dustin.
Hi.
It's wonderful to see you.
Thanks. Nice to see you too.
Dustin and I met at Fakir School. And I went in 95 or 6. And you went, when did you go to Fakir?
I think I started working at the school. It might have been about that time, 95 maybe, when I started helping out and eventually transitioned into a teaching position that I've been doing off and on ever since.
And when you first started, what is it that brought you to Fakir? How did you two meet? How did you get to be involved in the teaching?
It was really just by chance. I remember seeing my first nostril piercing when I was 6. There was a teacher's assistant in our classroom, and I don't remember what ethnicity she was. I remember she had darker skin and she had a nostril piercing, and I thought that was the coolest, most beautiful thing ever. And I wanted my nose pierced ever since. And my parents are very conservative and were not okay with that. When I was 14, I started piercing myself and friends. So, pierced my nose and ears and eyebrow. And I was 16, I think, when I was working at a bead store. And we had so many people come in asking where to get body piercings from that this guy that I knew who, hung out at the local coffee shops had said he worked at a place called Leather Masters. So they do BDSM, like bondage toys and big, sex toys for the gay crowd. And he was saying, well, I have a friend that pierces there sometime. Like maybe I'll have him come in and talk to you guys about piercing here. And at that point, you could pretty much do piercing anywhere. You had your little, to-go kits and your massage table, and you could kind of set up in the back of any space, and that was totally normal and acceptable. So he has his friend Ken come into the studio or into the shop and talks with the owner, and we start having him out once a week to pierce. And, we do like sign-ups during the week, and, then he'd come in and do a bunch of piercings. And at that point, my parents had sent me away to boarding school when I was 15. And it's one of those like residential treatment center places where like if you don't like who your kids are, you hire these people to come kidnap them, and they drive them to Utah or Texas or wherever the school is. And like they basically like beat out of you whatever it is that, about your personality and stuff that your parents didn't like.
Get in line.
Right. So one of the things that I had to repeat before I was let back out was that if my parents didn't want me piercing my body, I wasn't allowed to pierce my body, and that body piercing is mutilation and, stuff like that. Right now, Paris Hilton is doing a big like awareness campaign because she was sent to a bunch of those camps too. So it's been pretty amazing to see her stand up against all that abuse and horrific treatment and actually do some good work with it.
Yeah.
So by the time I was working at the bead place and we were having piercings, once a week, I couldn't have any facial piercings. So I'm 16 and I'm like, fuck it, I want a piercing. Like, what can I pierce? Fuck, I'll pierce my nipple. And in the cabinet above the oven, it was a cereal cabinet, really deep. In the very back, there was this old Ziploc bag, and it had like this giant syringe and like some 16 gauge needles. I'm like, all right, I guess this is what you use. So, I get my little like alcohol pad and pierce my nipple with the random needle that I found in a cabinet, and put some jewelry in. It was like some sterling silver thing. And when Ken came the next time to do piercings, I'm like, oh yeah, I pierced my nipple. He's like, oh, okay, let me check if it's like, I'm a minor, and he's like, let me check your boob, make sure it's okay. And so he's like, okay, you can't have that jewelry in there, put this in instead. And yeah, years later, I had asked my mother what was up with that syringe in the cabinet. And she was like, oh, that old thing. We used to use that to drain the pus out of the dog's ear when it was infected. And like the dog had been dead for years by then, but still like kind of gross. So as I was working at the bead store, Ken eventually asked me like, do you want to learn how to do this for real? I'm like, yeah, that'd be cool. So I started working at a studio that he had opened with a couple other people in San Jose, working behind the counter. And it was in San Jose, and there was a street festival that would happen once a year. And they decided to do piercing there. And they had, they were friends with Fakir, and they were friends with Eric Dakota. And so they had them come in to help pierce on like during that festival. So that's how I met Fakir. Is I was the counter girl, the day that he came and walked through and was piercing. And I remember looking at this guy and just being puzzled. Like, he's just this nerdy looking guy. I can't remember if he even had like his septum spike in, but he has his glasses, and like he kind of dressed a little dorky, and he's this older guy that like doesn't look like he fits in with the group of piercers with all their crazy piercings and tattoos and hair and stuff. And yeah, so he left, and it's like, okay. The studio that I was at ended up closing, and so Eric Dakota had offered me a job at his place, making steel body jewelry, Dakota Steel. So I was doing quality control there for a while I was apprenticing with Ken at the studio that he was at in Santa Cruz.
And how old are you here?
I think I had just turned 18. So I was 17 when I was working the counter in San Jose and met Fakir. I was 18 by the time we were doing stuff in Santa Cruz. So did my apprenticeship for probably about a year there, and then started working at the studio.
And your apprenticeship was with Ken Coyote.
Yeah.
Who is now in charge of the Fakir School.
Right. Mm-hmm. And even then he was working at the Fakir School and starting to he started working there with the idea of taking it over. Fakir had expressed an interest in having someone else kind of run it and be in charge and, deal with a lot of the logistics and stuff so that Fakir can focus on being the Fakir. So yeah, in all his glory. I miss that guy. So as Ken started working there, he brought me in as well to like do tools and, just kind of background stuff. And then eventually start teaching, slowly until I was a full instructor. So it was really working at the school is where I really got to know Fakir.
Yeah, that definitely would do it. So at this time period, are you still immersed in the family life that's restrictive of this expression? Like as you're entering full blown into the immersion of this industry as it's developing, are you still under parental control? And okay, good. You've gotten out from that. You're able to fully flower into the person that you want to be. So it's I think very common for people to have that personal relationship with piercing who are experiencing so much external parental control or societal control and feel very much that need to differentiate, to kind of claim ownership. So to me, like when I first did my nipple piercings, it was very much saying like, this is my body. This I am planting a flag on this moonscape, because it is mine and I direct, I control, and I determine what is aesthetically pleasing and what is morally correct for my personhood.
Yeah. So growing up in a super restrictive Christian environment, what I wore was really highly controlled. Who I was friends with, they tried to control. What I ate was controlled. So I wasn't allowed to have sugar in anything until I was 13. There were a lot of clothes that, I was told that was rude to wear those clothes because it shows off too much of your body. So I was taught a lot of body shame. and a lot of like, thou shalt honor thy mother and father kind of thing. So like whatever they said, it's kind of like a wild card of whatever they say, like that's what the Bible says you have to do. And it's like, fuck, like I can't live like this. So the day that they had me locked up, I made a promise to myself. I had been running away previously, but you know, being 15-year-old runaway is a little hard to be independent because you can't get a job or anything. So I made a promise to myself that when I got out, I was going to get a job, I was going to buy a vehicle that I could live in, and I was going to run away again. And it took me a year to do that, but I did. So I spent my 16th year at their house. And then as soon as I was 17 and I got that diploma early, like I was out. So I was living in my van for a little bit, my VW van. And that's when I started working at the piercing studio and apprenticing with Ken. And there was a really fun summer when he and his girlfriend, now wife, were living in his VW bus too. So at the shop that we worked at, there was a carport, and we put doors on the carport, and we would like park our buses in there, and it was like summer camping, like all summer. It was really neat.
Wow, that's how some super connections get formed, like that,
Yeah.
those early formative years and doing that. And, you know, realistically, with the amount of rent in California, I'm surprised more people aren't living in their vans.
Well, more and more people are doing it. Even like people that work at Google, they're just like, fuck it, I can live in my van in the parking lot, have access to all the showers and stuff, and save a bunch of money, which is pretty smart.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus the way that they're doing those vans nowadays.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of looking at van porn all the time. That's one of the goals that we have when we move to Europe is to get one of those Sprinter vans or one of the 4-wheel drive versions and make it livable. Yeah. So tell me, like, as were you the first person to get their tongue split in the modern tradition?
The
That
first
we
person
know.
that I was aware of, there wasn't anyone around who had done it. I had pet snakes and was like, oh, they have their tongues split. I wonder if I could split mine. And I think I'd been piercing for maybe almost a year in the studio in Santa Cruz. And, you know, back then we didn't have the standards for like gauge sizes for different piercings. So like you'd see 18 gauge navels come in and like they're migrating out. And why is that happening? And with understanding that the body will push something out that's so thin, I was thinking like, well, I was trying to go through the different ways that you could split your tongue and have it be successful. The cells in your mouth regenerate so fast that if you bite your tongue, by the time you get to the hospital, it can have like sutured itself back up in the wrong position. So like, how do you split your tongue and keep the halves separate to heal? And, you know, like some sort of steel plate in there didn't make sense. But the idea of cutting slowly to where it would heal as it cut, like how a piercing might migrate out, made more sense to me. I made an appointment with my doctor to ask them if I split my tongue and I didn't like it, could they put it back together? And they were
And they
like,
were like, what?
yeah, I think you need to speak to a plastic surgeon about that. Is there anything else we can help you with? Like, no, that's it. And there was a nurse there, and he was just as puzzled as the doctor. He was a younger guy, and I ran into him maybe a year later, and he worked at like this fish market restaurant, and I was going in for like fish or chips or something, and he's like, "Oh, you're that girl that wanted to split her tongue. Did you ever do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, look." So yeah, it was really just trial and error, trying to figure out, with all the different pieces of information I had, how I could make it work. The idea that I needed a healed tongue piercing to kind of hold the back wall was another consideration. So yeah, I had two piercings. I think they were both stretched to 2 gauge or 4 gauge at the time, which made Spanish class really, really hard. Yeah, rolling your R's with 2 gauge barbells, not going to happen. So yeah, fishing line through the front piercing and kept retightening it for about 3 weeks. And I was going kind of slow because I didn't know what was going to happen. And, eventually it did cut through. And when I decided to cut it to the, and that's when Fakir did the photography for his Body Play magazine. So now my tongue is split back a little bit further than that. So the second time that I did it in, I think it was 3 days, because like I knew how it worked, I knew what was going to happen, and I didn't want 3 weeks of this bullshit. So
It's
just
not very comfortable during that time period. That's a tremendous amount of commitment, given that you have to eat, talk, and live with this perpetual discomfort, pain in your mouth.
And like talking to clients and, not trying not to be moody with them. And I've had clients since then, like come back and be like, oh yeah, you were splitting your tongue last time I saw you. How did that go? I'm like, oh God, I hope I wasn't super cranky with you. They're like, no, you were fine. I'm like, okay, cool.
That's dedication. And, and I think that what people don't recognize from this perspective is now if I wanted to get a professional piercing, I have a dozen places in my hometown alone, right? Back then, if I wanted to get a piercing, which I did, I wanted to get my nipples pierced first, there was a dude that did it out of a sex toy store in Seattle. I lived in Oregon. And you go there, and he wasn't there that day, but they called him. So I was able to go to his apartment, where he pulled out a tackle box and gave me some externally threaded circular barbells that the balls kept falling off of. So I ended up going to a bead store, much like the one that you worked at, and then like super gluing some rose quartz onto the end of my barbells. And that was like the neatest thing going, because nobody had that jewelry, but there was no way I could get them off. I super glued them on. So yeah, it wasn't the way it is now, where you have so many options available to you. It wasn't the way it was now, where there's how-to videos and formal apprenticeship programs. Like, it was the trial and error phase, and everything that we were doing was something that came from some internal, collective, personal, unconscious, and it just kind of bubbled up. And it's, now people have seen split tongues. And there's a couple of different methods to do them, and it seems like all old hat, but then nobody ever thought about that. You were first,
And a lot of it is problem solving, not just with tongue splitting, but with getting body piercings to work consistently. And, everything that we do now, even with jewelry, it's all trial and error, all problem solving, what didn't work, how can we improve it? And everyone like building off everyone else's ideas.
Yeah. We are now the benefits, the recipients of decades of people's internal, process of exploration, and using ourselves as human guinea pigs. And that's how Fakir himself started, and how, Ken was able to start carrying that torch to train others to do this, is that they did it on themselves first. They did it on their friends at piercing parties. They did it at Leatherworks. And, it was a huge aspect of the gay community and the BDSM community. That's really the energetic force, like the energetic source that we came from, So that's awesome. And then you continued piercing and self-modifying and working with the Fakir instructors, and being an instructor and teaching in the school, and shepherding like generation upon generation of new piercers. How many decades, or how long have you been doing work with the Fakir intensives?
Probably since 96. So it's been a good long while.
Yeah.
And, I've gotten to work with and learn from so many amazing people in the industry. I worked briefly at Obscurities for Alan Faulkner, and got to work with Steve Joyner and Pat Tidwell. And, I've had these opportunities. I feel so fortunate, because I have never had to interview for a job in piercing that I've gotten. That's not to say that I haven't interviewed for a few jobs that I didn't get, but like all the ones I got, it was just like, oh, hey, you're free. You want to come pierce for us? Like, yeah, okay. So, yeah, I feel so fortunate that piercing has taken care of me, and that I've had all these minds that I can like pick at and, you know, get ideas from and bounce thoughts off of and call if I'm stumped on a piercing. That, you know, part of my giving back to, you know, the piercing community or entity or whatever it is teaching, you know, continuing to pass that knowledge on as much as I can.
Yeah, continuing to light the torch for people who have that flame that needs to be nurtured. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that aspect. And you probably have met hundreds of piercers. And you've seen what it takes, you know, the ones that are going to be in this industry for life, you know, that find something here that isn't duplicated in the larger society as a whole. Because I think just like the religious communities, they have that connection, that built-in family support, that shared experience that's able to allow them to bond. And I think that under the adversity and the oppression that you were experiencing individually and that we've collectively experienced as fringe dwelling individuals, now in the mainstream, like now here we are 20 years later, and it's unusual not to be pierced. It's people spend, even during the pandemic, my experience is they spend a tremendous amount of time because our society doesn't have enough rituals. It doesn't have enough genuine like moments of self-reclamation or self-expression. And so it's so huge that it lasted through the pandemic. It's become part of the mainstream. But when we were there, those early bonds, I think, were really forged so strong because we weren't out there in the rest of the society. We were exploring a whole new path and we were pioneers. And to that extent, that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because as much as we talked earlier, as women, we feel like imposters who, you know, what are they talking about? I took my kid to camp today. I watch TV at night and, you know, sleep at 10:30 at night. Like, we're not that exciting, but we were. These are genuine aspects of our evolution that we're able to build upon for the rest of the generations that came after us.
Yeah.
So kudos to you. You know, thank you for your contributions. Thanks for being a strong woman in the industry. Thanks for, you know, being an authentic woman in the industry, just doing what you needed to do for yourself and allowing the resonance of that to affect so many other people positively, you know.
And I think part of being able to do that has to do with, you know, having really supportive people in the industry around me. You know, Ken pretty much handing me an apprenticeship and like, you know, grabbing me and pulling me into the Fakir school, and, you know, Fakir's support with stuff too. Like having him be interested in putting me in his magazine was huge. Like that was a huge validation for me that like, it's okay for me to own my body and change my body and mold it, you know, very opposite of what I was raised with. And it pains me so much to hear about, you know, especially women, it seems, who have really, really shitty apprenticeship situations where it's like a carrot dangled on a stick that they're never going to reach. Abusive situations where, like, you know, I'm reading what they're posting and I'm just like, run, like, and then feeling like that's the only chance that they have to be a part of the industry. And if they give it up, they're either, you know, not showing that they're dedicated enough, or they're losing their only opportunity. And, you know, on the other side of that situation is the people that are using the power of the knowledge as, you know, a way to control and manipulate and abuse people. Like, it's so awful.
Right. And apprenticeship should be a mutual win-win circumstance, whereas I get to transfer my knowledge to somebody who is enthusiastic and will carry that torch forward. Because, you know, as I said, like, I'm now in my 50s, I pierce very rarely, and Yeah, we have started an apprentice who will be finishing this year that has all of that enthusiasm, that has all of that potential to bring connection to people that are coming into the studio, that's, on the same kind of path that they are, as the same generation as they are. And an apprenticeship should always be supportive. It also should be a place where you feel included and uplifted and not exploited and not I'm not under the boot of someone who is using you strictly to bolster their own ego. And there is some of that for sure that's happened. I think that we as a fringe society have our own elements of undesirables that be nature of our inclusive, we have to like love each other no matter what because everybody else is against us. We've allowed that for too long. We kind of gave people a pass on some of their dysfunctional behavior. And like much of the rest of society, from the governorships on to the medical industry and our sports characters, et cetera, we're calling in some accountability. And that's a fantastic time to be in, to say, like, as a strong woman, I survived in this industry and I got very little like BS from it, but I know that existed and it will not exist under my supervision for the next generations. If I see something, I will say something and we will take you out.
Yeah. I was like, after reading a lot of other people's apprenticeship stories, like I feel really lucky that like I didn't have to deal with any hazing or humiliation or like anything that people are trying to pass off as like, oh no, it's just a rite of passage, it's how you get through. Just like in what are the college groups, the
fraternities. It's like, yeah, there is no gauntlet that you have to run. Excuse me, I did not used to need to disparage that particular term because it's a huge aspect of our industry. Gauntlet was one of the forefathers, and they've done well by the industry. But no, you do not need to put up with a bunch of BS, and that's true in the tattoo industry as well. It's like, no. Having an apprentice is not having a built-in wash my car, clean my dog. No, it is supposed to be about the education, and the reward for doing that is the reward of having raised a proper child and knowing that they will carry your name forward. That's the reward. It should not necessarily be for financial gain, although it is a knowledge and a power that does need to be compensated in cases, but not through the denigration of the spirit of the individual, right?
Yeah. And it's really sad to see people's spirits crushed because like, is that going to get rebuilt, or has their passion for piercing been like so tarnished that they're no longer going to be able to contribute or participate?
Right. Yeah. And there are instances where it definitely does taint your impression of it. And that's super unfortunate. And you had a very uniquely wonderful experience because of the time, the location, and because of who you were. I mean, ultimately, you weren't the only little repressed teenager running around who was had the potential to flower in this industry, but you were one that was, that brought your unique gifts that were recognized by the people that were around you, that wanted to spend time with you, that wanted to foster your growth, that wanted to participate and to be, and to be uplifted through your experiences, because you were an innovator from the very beginning. Like, lots of people had snakes. Not everybody chose to spend almost a month in pure agony trying to make themselves look like one.
Dedication. That was one thing that I kind of miss about the tie-off method that I did, is that, very early on, it was very much like trial, kind of like this was a really hard thing that like if you wanted your tongue pierced, like you really had to work for it. And that's not to say that like other methods of tongue piercing are a walk in the park, but like this was very like testing your limits and your perseverance. And there were more than one person that had talked to me about it that started to do it, that they're like, no, I tried it a couple days, nope, I'm good.
That would definitely have been me. I'd have been like, Yeah, if it's not an immediate yes for me, like I'm not breaking in shoes, I'm not breaking in piercings. Like I have to be able to ignore it from the get, or it can't be part of my life. I will. So I'm having a hard enough time wearing a nose chain. I'm just like, oh, it's there. I can feel it all the time. I can't even imagine if there was pain in my mouth. I'd be like, mm-mm, mm-mm.
Yeah.
So good for you for your dedication. So let's go back to the timeline. So here you are, you're now like flowering into your, decades of teaching, etc. How did you decide to make a transition into designing jewelry? Were you just, I know that I personally have seen so many lacks of quality jewelry. Like we have the basics down, but there weren't a lot of, like, I'm wearing a pair of yours right now. There wasn't a lot of actual like innovation. There was a lot of, I would say, cultural appreciation where I could see the designers were either going overseas or they were, looking at books of some of the antiquities of jewelry, et cetera, and using those as motivation to make some things. But there wasn't a lot of what I would consider truly unique jewelry happening for those of us who were stretching and piercing.
Mm.
So how'd you do that?
I've always made jewelry in one form or another. So, working at the bead store at an earlier age, in my teenage years, I got that job because like I was shopping there because I was making jewelry already. And, it's far different, metalsmithing is way different than like beading jewelry, but, that's somewhere where you can start and, have an easier time at teaching yourself. I've kind of gone like in and out of the piercing industry a little bit. I've always had like a couple of toes in at least. So, when I wasn't working at a studio, I was still working at the school and teaching. But at a certain point, I realized that I wasn't making enough money to be able to thrive, really. I was never going to be able to buy a house being a piercer. And I'm thrilled to see the instances where that's not true anymore. Like it is amazing to me. And like, I'm so happy that people are able to have health insurance and 401ks.
Yes.
It's like we've grown so much, like good for us.
Right. I feel like such an adult.
Yeah. So when I was living in Austin for 13 years, I was looking at my life and, what I wanted, home ownership and stuff, and like, well, how do I get there? So I was taking classes. I was doing the paralegal degree at the community college that I was at, and I was probably about 3/4 of the way through it. And law is something that I'm kind of fascinated with as well. Like, learning especially family law. Learning the different like standards and how they write and the research and stuff. I ended up getting pregnant with my first child and had to take a break. And so to bribe myself back into the paralegal course, as I, after I had her, I let myself take a jewelry class. And I ended up dropping out of the paralegal class and just kept taking jewelry classes.
That's right. History of following your passion.
Yeah.
Your passion.
But like, I really did enjoy the law stuff too. And I think I would have been good at it. And I think I could tame down my appearance enough to be able to do that. But there would definitely be a trade-off. There's trade-offs with any choice that you make in life. But yeah, so I started taking jewelry classes and, being a piercer and running into, firsthand the different issues with jewelry and especially those doff hearts for one. Like when those came out, I wasn't piercing actively, but the idea of like looking at those little tiny curves and trying to imagine getting those into a fresh doff, like I didn't understand how people were doing it. I'm imagining, how many times are they having a disconnect and having to, taper it back open and, get that beast in there. Why isn't anyone making them with the opening at the bottom? So I started, working on a design for that. And a lot of my mindset with designs is, how does this make sense in the piercing situation? Like with the saddle hooks, we're wearing big heavy things in stretched ears. There's all this surface area that we're not using. If we can have a larger surface area to hang that weight on, the weight's going to be distributed more evenly. It's going to be more comfortable than just, a tiny little 6-gauge hook with all that weight on it.
Oh, and they are. Saddles are the game changer. I don't even wear full round plugs anymore either. But once you stretch to a certain point, there's a tremendous amount of antitragus that's exposed that the pressure against is really uncomfortable. Whereas saddles all day, every day. Thanks for that.
No problem.
So yeah, so you used your experience. And do you think that perhaps the early experiences you had in terms of being controlled and not allowed freedom of expression makes it a little bit harder for you to choose to be in a circumstance where you will have to modify your personality to conform? Because I know that for me, like I fought so hard to be the woman that I am, like the idea of putting on a costume in order to be effective, it messes with my sense of authenticity and integrity.
I've always had different groups of friends that I fit in with. So I feel like I'm somewhat able to kind of merge among various groups. And, being a parent has kind of, I don't know, there's times when if I want to be taken more seriously, I will tone down my appearance. Dealing with the school or school district. And one thing that actually helps is having a name that is typically male. I feel like I get a lot different response from people with that, that signature sign off. They assume they're talking to a dude and like take me more seriously.
I've unfortunately heard that before.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some things with the societal racism too, where similar experiences and their antithesis can be from your house evaluation if you have a white sounding name, right? I mean, that's like the statistics are shocking and yet not shocking, but shocking nonetheless. Yeah. So yeah, no, being able to kind of pass under the radar as a dominant gender.
Yeah. And I can deal with changing my appearance for short periods of time, I think, but I think a longer period of time of having to do that would kind of wear on me. I also tend to be very chameleon-like, where if I do my hair and makeup differently, people don't recognize me. Like I've walked up to people that I've worked with at APP before and just been like, "Hi, how you doing?" And they're in the middle of a conversation with someone else, and they're like, and continue their conversation, and like I'm getting the cold shoulder, like, what? Who is this girl? Why is she talking to me? Like, and then it dawns on them who I am. They're like, "Oh my God, I didn't even recognize you." Like I get that a lot. I didn't even recognize you. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to play with.
It's a good skill. I mean, being able to be adaptive in various social circumstances is obviously something that's going to serve anyone well. For me, being more reactionary, I feel that if I knew that looking a certain way was going to get me more, I would go the opposite and be like, in your face. I'm an old woman with a bunch of piercings and I'm going to run in things this way. Like I'm still in charge. Like, how does that make you feel? Not my problem. So I think that your approach is far more effective, and I just try to have fun with mine because if I try, then I just end up being real mad about it.
I feel like I try to have fun with my method too. For me, I rely a lot on first impressions. Like if someone does not if they make bad first impression on me, it's really hard to ever get past that. I remember going into with 16 and the dude there being so rude that like ever since then I'm like, fuck that guy, fuck him. I don't care what he's done, what books he's written, what kind of history he's brought to our industry. Fuck him and his snotty shit ass.
I think that there's been a number of people who have had that reaction,
Yeah.
when they say, beware of meeting your idols, because it can really destroy some preconceptions that you had for this,
Yeah.
this guiding light that you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that they were there then and they brought so much to the table. And then you meet them and you're like, what a stupid prick.
Yeah. There was a kid in one of my high schools who absolutely loved the crew there and was like, oh, no, you have to meet them. They're so awesome. And so I went in with him once and it's like, that guy?
As somebody who doesn't suffer from low self-esteem, I have a tendency to gravitate towards more of the proud and self-aware and confident and that I think that my introduction there was one of the times where I was like, there is such thing as too much. Like I try to exhibit a sort of confidence, or I try to manifest the confidence that I have in a way that's not diminishing to others. Like I want to elevate others. I want you to feel like you brought so much to things, and that I, as a strong and independent woman, recognize that in that you do that, and really just glad to have known you in the ways that we've had and had the time that we've had. And I want to introduce you to everyone who doesn't know you, who doesn't know that, like, kind of like in the background and in the foreground and, and in ways you don't notice, there are these amazing individuals who have contributed things, with their own flesh and blood, by using their heart and their minds to overcome some of the limitations they had from familial or societal influences and flower into the humans that they were meant to be. And it's not all fucking easy, right? Like, and it's not all glamorous. Like you said, we're still taking our kids to camp and we're still whatever, but in the midst of that, you still added fuel and fire and advancement to an industry that was just coming into fruition, that is tapping into something that's huge, that people still need, that's above and beyond the decorative. But I want to get back to the jewelry because I feel like, you are still making stuff, aren't you?
I am, yeah. I've switched more from, or kind of moved away from things for stretched ears, and I'm focusing more on gold. So it's really been a lot of like gold ends for threadless pieces right now. And right now, everything is just me. I'm in my studio right now. My kiln is like in the background going, and I have to cast later. And I would love to outsource casting. I'm actually working on that. And once I get some of the manufacturing outsourced a little bit, then I feel like I can focus more on the more individual pieces and get back to a little bit of the stretched ear designs.
Yes, please. Because ultimately, yours are the only pieces that I long-term enjoy wearing. The weight is right. The level of detailing is just exquisite. The quality of the stones is fantastic. I understand that like the whole industry has moved towards gold. It's been one of the changes. It went from being something that was pretty underground to being something that's very mainstream, and that people want to decorate with what we have as a culture, as a species, emulated and adored forever. We've always been a little gold obsessed from early days of yore. So it makes sense that as it comes to its zenith, that everybody wants that gold.
Yeah. The thing that I'm having a really hard time with right now is the companies outside of the piercing industry coming in and being all like, well, we want to make gold too. We want a piece of this body jewelry pie. And it's just so hard to see corporations come in riding on the backs of so many people that were social outcasts that have built an industry for themselves just to have it like diluted.
Right. You built it to this level where it can actually sustain careers, where someone like me can be piercing at 20, after 20 years, and can be looking at retiring without starving. My employees are not houseless. There's a half dozen of them that have bought homes, or others that are happy renting but are able to do things like take vacations and get medical procedures. Like that's something that was built on the backs of people like you and I. And it is discouraging to know that now that we've built this and, you know, made it comfortable, and there are people who have more resources, you know, that have business acumen, which, you know, how many of us went to business school? I mean, we basically just followed our passion and our, you know, our intuition and built this whole pathway from scratch.
Yeah.
Now that we built it, they're following it and, you know, and scooping up. And that is also another reason why I want to focus on innovators. It's the reason why at our studios, we don't use knockoff jewelry. Certainly most designs that have any popularity or, you know, profitability have been duplicated overseas.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times some of the smaller designers and overseas developers that we're using, they'll come up with a whole line and then somehow gets sneaked out from under them before they can even launch it, and it's in some overseas market. So I think it's really important as a business to support that, to get that information out there so that people can make ethical choices when consuming. Because certainly we could sell things for less, but we were doing things by undercutting the people who did the work. We won't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the designs, like, it's very obvious that they've been stolen. And like when I design things, I try to make things that, like, I'm not seeing other places. And sometimes that's really hard because it's like, okay, I want to do a pentagram end, like a zillion other places. Like there are universal things, especially in nature with flowers and leaves and plants and stuff like that. But you know, I try to do them at least a little, you know, my own flair a little bit, my own interpretation of the design a little bit. And I wish that, you know, all the companies were doing that, trying to respect each other's designs as much as possible, you know, when applicable.
Yes.
There was another designer who's no longer in the industry where they came out with, I think, 3 different designs that I had sketches for in my sketchbook. And I was just like, oh, motherfuckers, like, they're riding the same, like, creative train as me, and they're faster than me, and they're getting it out. Well, now I can't do those designs. Damn it.
Right. Yeah, that's difficult because, as you know, there's that individual drive, that light within all of us that drew us to this pathway. But again, it is also part of the collective unconscious. It's part of the human experience. It's a universal as well. And the trends, I remember when, you know, sunflowers were such a big deal. I had been sketching a sunflower that I wanted as a tattoo. And then all of a sudden it was paying my rent for 3 months, as all the artists in my studio were doing. And I had to decide, you know, do I still want this piece? Is it still individually relevant? Or was I responding to some kind of collective aesthetic that isn't deeply personal? For me, I had to realize that, like, I like sunflowers, but I don't need to wear one. And that's, but with the jewelry and those designs as well, you're talking about a whole lot of R&D, right? You got to do so much to figure out how heavy, how is this going to catch the edges, are going to make the piercing unhappy? What kind of piercings is it going to be able to use for? What, you know, what weight of pen do I have to use in order to make sure that this is sturdy, or does it have to be threaded? There's all so many things of that, and so many things you put a lot of time and energy into developing that need to be scrapped because they're not functional.
Yeah.
And then to have that also be the case that somebody else was developing at the same time. And then then you want to be conscientious about it, because I'm sorry, ethics is the way we're going to advance. We have to do it ethically. We have to make those sacrifices, whether it's financial or of time and of energy and of love, to make sure that we maintain. You know? Tell me what, so we should probably wrap up soon, but I really would like to know, and I think that the people watching would like to know, what you would say to somebody who wanted to enter the industry at this point. Like, how have things changed? How are they the same? And what wisdom can you provide from your perspective of 20 plus years?
There are so many more options now than there were when I started. You know, I was lucky to stumble into my apprenticeship. And I remember working the counter, and, you know, you get a lot of people coming in inquiring about, you know, if we're taking on apprentices or not. And so, you know, the amount of apprenticeships available even were few and far between. I think figuring out what level you want to work at too. Like some people feel like they have to start at, really crappy studios that use externally threaded jewelry. And I want to say, like, you don't have to anymore. Like if you show enough dedication and, persistence, you can, like, there are higher quality studios that will have opportunities. The more education you can get outside of seeking an apprenticeship shows a certain level of dedication and investment into the piercing industry. A lot of the people that we get asking about apprenticeships, it's hard to gauge how serious they are. And taking on an apprentice is a huge responsibility. And to do that, just to have, start with someone, just to have them flake out not too long down the line, like that's hard for the person taking on the apprentice as well. So I think, if you were to take, go to, can you, oh man, I don't think you can go to the APP unless you can't take any classes unless you're a piercer already, right?
You can't take any specific piercing technique classes, but there are a number of other classes you can take, like initial jewelry sizes, problem shooting, stuff like that. Important information you're still able to get, and connections you can make by going once we eventually get to go again.
Yeah. So I think things like that, the piercing school, we have had a lot of people who have sent their apprentices to the piercing school, both as a way to kind of give them a certain foundation to build off of so that they didn't have to do all the fundamentals. And I think also as a way to, test how serious people are. And people who have gone through piercing courses, not necessarily the fakir one, but, any of them have invested any time or energy into, learning about this trade, I think are going to be taken a lot more seriously as a potential apprentice. Yes. You were mentioning a lot of us haven't taken business classes. Well, maybe taking a business class or two, maybe taking like a health and safety class, getting your CPR and, bloodborne pathogens, and maybe, a little bit of biology, like anything that you can do to make yourself more valuable and show that you've already invested time and energy into it is going to get you further along in an apprenticeship situation.
I agree. There's a lot of people, because of the mainstream and the more accepted aspect of this, for whom that this is now accessible. And by nature of that, the number of people who are interested in piercing is far greater than the demand for new piercers, especially when it takes, at least in our studio, it takes us a 2 solid year commitment to that person in order to make them someone we would feel comfortable unleashing on the public.
Right.
And, when we first started, we didn't know anything and we were making up as we went along. I would say that now we have different options, and therefore our standards need to be higher as in terms of who we choose to allow into this industry as an apprentice, and, who we allow to mentor that new generation. But also just finding people who take both of those roles very seriously, so that we don't end up with mentor burnout. Because and if you take on energy and you end up with a half-assed apprentice who is letting everyone of their personal things become a problem in their piercing career, and you see more obstacles and they do opportunities, that's going to end up with mentor burnout. And then we're going to end up like we did about 5 years ago, where we realized everybody was so busy piercing, nobody trained the next generation. And then we're like, who are we going to hire? We've got all of this business, we have all of this opportunity, and we're fighting over the few guest piercers of worth that are out there being like, no, come work with us, come to Portland, where it's really hard to live because it's so inflated in price, but it's better than California. So, hey, I feel like that's kind of what we're saying now. And as we've recognized the need for more fresh perspective and bodies to carry the next, generation forward, I think we are looking for somebody who's genuine about it, who isn't just thinking it's a cool job, because it is a job, right? It's still work. You still need to be there on time. You still need to be conscious every single day, because you people's health and safety in your purview. So I think that's great advice. And I think that, something we touched upon earlier before we started recording was you're talking about, these horrible apprenticeships and this abuse within the industry and within an industry where you have something to offer in terms of teaching and opportunity, and you exploit that to denigrate the individuals involved, or to, you know, to show them some lower class way of doing things. I never worked external. I don't think you have to. And that was almost all that was available when I started. But
Yeah.
I've never used external.
I've had to at a couple of shops early on. Well, maybe just one shop early on, but yeah,
I worked at one that offered both, and that when I would try to like lean someone towards the better one, would be like, don't worry about it, you know, just spend the $25. You don't have to pay that $50. And I'd be like, you shut your whore mouth.
yeah.
I'm the one that's piercing. We're going to use the internal.
Yeah.
So I would definitely just say, like, be the person that you would want to train.
Mm-hmm.
Put the work and the effort into developing the skill sets that would make your foundation for teaching easier and better. And don't feel like you have to settle.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to wash somebody's chonies and listen to them whine just, you know, in order to pay for your apprenticeship. Like, yeah. So is there anything else about you that you feel like we should know and that you think would be value to the next generation of piercers coming?
Well, being a, you know, more fakir aligned piercer, you know, I have to bring up like the spirituality side of piercing. And that's not like, you know, there's a piercing god that we worship, but it's about like the energy flow between people, about how, you know, we are performing a kind of ritual for people, and not with every piercing. Like some people really just want like whatever little hole and it's no big deal or whatever. But for a lot of people, like the more that you dig, the more you find out like how important this is to them. And you are creating and influencing that experience for them like so much. And when you're more open to stuff like that, and you take the time to get to know people and their reasons behind piercings, you know, there's a lot of like magic and also like satisfaction that happens. Like, you know, the woman that comes in to get an ear piercing because like she just finished, like it's a year since she last finished chemo. Like that's a big thing for her. And for her to ask me to participate in something like that for her is an honor. The place Pierced Out in San Jose, I've worked there 3 different times throughout the years. I love them. I love the owners. I love the shop. I love the clientele. The clientele is awesome. And it's in this area with, you know, very mixed ethnicities. And the Indian women that come in to have me pierce their nostrils, like they're asking me to participate in a tradition from their culture thousands of years old. Like, it is so humbling. And like the ego that gets in the way of those experiences for piercers, you know, their own ego, like it really takes away from the whole experience for everyone involved. You know, I've had really cool experiences. There was this German grandma who was bringing in her granddaughter with her daughter. So 3 generations, the grandma and the granddaughter were getting their nostrils pierced. And like the grandma was from Germany and like, you know, very like funny humor. And then the mom decided, you know, after, you know, the 2 of them got pierced, that she wanted to get pierced too. So I got to pierce 3 generations of women's nostrils in this one family. That is so fucking cool. Like, I didn't get that kind of support and like bonding in my family growing up, but I can participate in it with someone else's family and offer them that.
Yes. And what you're talking about there is mutual healing, right? I remember Fakir saying that even though people may express that they're just coming in for an ear piercing, that it's invariably more than that, because the act of getting pierced is an act of defiance, not just about cultural norms, because there are norms within cultures that's completely expected, but it is still a defiance of your body, of our, you know, of our intuition, which is not to consciously self-harm. To pain is to be avoided. Damage is to be, is to be avoided. And yet we're consciously walking into this experience that requires us to perforate skin, to damage tissue for set purpose that has no biological imperative, right? Like this is not going to help us make babies or get fuel into our bodies. This is a deterrent to some of the most major survival instincts that we have. And yet it is, as I've learned even more so during the pandemic, essential to our core energetic soul centered beings.
Mhm.
And so being conscious of the fact that even if they're not conscious of it, that there is an essential component, and just being willing to help facilitate that helps them get what they need out of the process, whether it was just to prove that they could do it, that they're stronger than they think they are, whether it was in defiance of norms that have been stuck on them, whether it is in community with norms that they want to express connection to. Like all of those things, find out where your client is coming from and help them facilitate that. Whether you call it a ritual, what language you use, that is always a present energetic component. And I thank Fakir for, in the early days of my career, making me conscious of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great note to kind of end on, is just like continue to remember the spirit and to honor the energy and experience of your clients.
And also the trust that they're putting in you, a stranger, to do this to their body and to take them through that experience safely to the other end. Sometimes with their kids, they're trusting you with their children.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge honor. And it's definitely part of what has sustained me in this industry for as long as it has, is being able to facilitate that kind of meaning and that kind of growth and that kind of self connection for people.
Yeah.
Here. All right. Well, I'm going to end this recording. I want to thank you so much for jumping on here and talking with me today. It was a great excuse to spend some time together.
Oh, lovely to see your face.